The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Hello and welcome to The Best in the World with Richard Parr. It's the start of the Paralympic Games, so I thought who better to get on the show than one of the greatest Paralympians of all time. Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson is on the podcast today. We are going to learn from the very, very, very best. She is an 11-time Paralympic gold medalist. She broke over 30 world records and she won the London Marathon 6 times. She truly is the best in the world and she is on today's show. We learn so much from her when she talks about her training programs and her nutritional programs. Tanni talks about family support, music and setting goals. And now, after her career as an athlete has finished, Tanni is now a crossbench peer in the House of Lords. That's why she is Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson. And because of her political background, we get into some politics, which I'm not usually an expert about. Not usually, I'm never an expert about, but we do discuss a little bit of politics on the show. We talk a little bit about disability rights, a little bit about Brexit, and also the power of social media. We talk all about that in the show. Before we get to the interview, I want to tell you about today's sponsor. It is Audible. Audible is offering a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/best. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Now, I don't know if you've seen it, but the advert for the Paralympic Games on Channel 4 is absolutely fantastic. It's inspiring. Try and look it up on YouTube. Try and watch it. It's really, really well done. And if you haven't watched much Paralympics before, give it a go. I honestly hadn't watched too much Paralympic Games before. But last year I was in Kazakhstan, I was in Almaty. I was doing a piece to see whether Almaty would get the Winter Olympic Games, which they didn't manage to. But while I was there, I did a few other sports stories, and one of them was on Paralympic powerlifting. And I've got to say, I was mesmerised by some of these people. They truly are the best in the world at what they do. One guy in particular from Iran, Siaman Rahman, he was powerlifting off the bench up to 295 kilos. That's like more than 3 of me. That it was absolutely unbelievable to see, and the amount of dedication and hard work which goes into something like that. You truly have to be the best in the world. So they're all on show in Rio in the Paralympic Games. If you're in the UK, it will be on Channel 4. Give it a watch. Trust me, you will be amazed. And it's an amazing chat with Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, and that's coming up next.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, welcome to The Best in the World with Richard Parr. You had a very accomplished sporting career, winning 11 Paralympic gold medals, 30 world records. You had a fantastic career. You're now a baroness in the House of Lords. Why don't you tell our listeners what you're up to right now?
I work on a mixture of things. I work on disability rights, so welfare reform, legal aid, sport and physical activity, about how people can be fitter and healthier. Very specific stuff I'm working on is a buses bill, which is about making buses more accessible for disabled people. So it's kind of quite a varied life that I have there. I never sort of particularly planned to go into politics, but the House of Lords is amazing because people may not like or agree with what you say, but they give time to listen to you. So actually it's a really empowering place to be, in that people want to learn. It's a bit like school, I guess. They want to learn about different things and about your area of expertise. So I love my time there. It's a great place to be.
And you're also still very busy with a lot of different charities, is that right?
Yeah, I sit on a number of charities. I think, for me, that's kind of always been quite important. So, Sports Aid Foundation, which helps young talented athletes who aren't yet on lottery funding. Tennis Foundation. So there's kind of a number that I work with, and I think of myself, I'm very privileged that I get to work with a lot of people I like, which is nice. So I think for me, the stuff I do with charities is about giving something back, because I've had a lot of help and support over the years, and I think I should kind of pay some of that forward to other people.
With all that on your plate, how well organised are you? How good are you with time management?
I think I'm all right. It's sometimes quite difficult to get the balance right. I think the hardest thing is that, because I live in the northeast of England, and I'm in London generally 4 days a week because of politics, it can be hard that I'm away from my family. And they kind of sacrifice a lot for the work that I do. But I like being busy. I'm a bit of a workaholic, really. So I don't mind, how much time I spend working, because I kind of think I get to do a lot of things which are really good fun.
I heard in another interview about that it was your family who had to give up a lot of sacrifices for your sporting career, and they're now having to give up a lot for your political career. Are they annoyed with you about this, or how do they feel about everything?
I think sometimes my husband's quite happy that I'm away from him for 4 days a week, to be honest. No, I mean, I kind of, before I made the decision to go into the Lords, I spoke about it at length with my husband, and my daughter was a little young for her to understand what I was doing. But I think it's quite important I spend time with her, explaining to her what I do. There are some things she's more interested in than others. But they're hugely supportive. I couldn't have done it without my husband and my wider family. So I'm very lucky that they're hugely supportive of the stuff that I choose to do.
And you mentioned your husband. In your sporting career, he was your coach, I believe. Is that something you'd recommend to other athletes and sports people to be doing?
It was quite an interesting relationship at times. So, we started off just kind of as friends, and then he became my boyfriend, then he became my training partner. And, then I think we got married, and he was my coach. So it kind of went in different steps. But, he was an athlete himself, and actually all I ever really wanted to do was beat him. And the whole of my Paralympic career, that's what I tried to do. I didn't manage to do it, but it's for us it worked really well, because for me, for a long time, wheelchair racing was the most important thing in my life, and he understood that and supported and helped and wanted me to be good. So for us it worked incredibly well. I mean, it's not always easy. I mean, we used to joke that if we had the team around, we were very clear if I was having a husband-wife row with him, or I was having a athlete-coach discussion, or I was, at one point, he was my performance director. So, I was having an athlete performance director discussion, which was incredibly polite. So for us, it was important to kind of differentiate, and for the rest of the team to understand what kind of discussion we were having.
And you said your aims were to beat him. How would you normally set other goals? Would you say, I want to win this at a Paralympics, I want to win this at a certain race? And how often would these goals get updated?
We always planned about 4 years ahead, sort of rolling 4 years, because you can't get to the end of a Paralympic cycle and then suddenly start trying to think about where you want to be, because every year is kind of an evolution as you move forward. So we'd certainly have a huge amount of detail around the following 2 years of training and preparation, with like the 4 year goal at the end. So it would sometimes, get updated, kind of could be weekly, monthly, if you had a great race or did very well, or if stuff wasn't working out. So I think what we were good at doing was that planning, preparation, and working out the best training to do. I think I was also good at making myself do things in training that I didn't enjoy, because you tend to, the things you don't like are the things you're not so good at, and that's where you can make massive improvements. So I think because I always had very high aspirations, I was able to make myself do all the stuff I had to. So in the whole of my career, I probably only missed a handful of training sessions, because you can't aspire to be the best in the world and find excuses for what you do. There aren't any excuses. You just have to get your head down and work really hard.
A couple of days ago, I spoke to the 2008 decathlon Olympic champion Brian Clay, and he said something similar to what you said, where he would train so hard in training that actually when it came to competing, that was easy. He knew that he'd done all the hard work, that this day would be a lot easier than a training day. So why don't you tell our listeners what was a typical training day for you? What would be the schedule and routine of a typical training day?
Well, we were training sort of 15 to 18 times a week. I was never sort of a very early riser, so probably first training session of the day would be 9:30, and then kind of mid-afternoon and then early evening. Combination between most of it would be training on the roads, 150 plus miles a week, 3 or 4 sessions in the gym, and then, body weight exercises, conditioning, physio, masseur, and then you've got all the technical stuff of building chairs, gloves. So it's sort of fairly all encompassing, actually. And I used to have a day off a week. I had other friends who worked on different cycles. And your day off, that's when you catch up on housework and shopping and all the other things that you have to do. So, but that was great. I mean, I loved it. It's a huge privilege being a GB athlete. So I have no regrets. I mean, to be honest, most of it's really boring. Training's just dull, because I lived in the northeast. I still live in the northeast of England, and I spent a lot of time on the trunk road between Redcar and Middlesbrough, and it's quite repetitive. So for those moments where it's glamorous and you're competing in front of 95,000 people, that's fantastic. But that doesn't happen that often, in a year. The vast majority of the time, it's you and a couple of training partners if you're lucky.
Is that difficult to adjust to when you do go to these big stadiums with so many people, when you are used to just training by yourself or competing in smaller events where you've then got these thousands of people? How does your mind cope with that?
You just kind of get used to sort of, you've got to switch it off, actually. You can't get excited about who's around or who's watching or how noisy the crowd is. So bizarrely, even when you're competing in front of tens of thousands of people, you don't hear it. And there's part of you that is there to perform, because that's why you're an athlete. But you just have to kind of try and ignore. There's all this stuff that you can't control as an athlete, so you just have to forget about it. To be perfectly honest, but it's definitely it's much nicer competing in front of a large crowd than the small crowd, and I've kind of had experience of both.
Did you have any particular pre-race rituals?
Not really. I had sort of a very sort of balanced sort of warm up, and I did very similar things in warm up. But I'm not really a very ritual person. I didn't listen to certain bits of music or anything like that. I had friends who did, but for me, I used music in training, but not in kind of race preparation. So mostly, I think probably the most annoying thing that I used to do is I used to like to be at the track with plenty of time to spare, which is fine if you're racing at 7:00 in the evening, but not so good if you're racing at 9:00 in the morning. So I used to like to be at the track a couple of hours before my race just to be settled and make sure everything was okay. So some of my coaches weren't always very happy with that.
What type of music were you listening to in training?
It varied quite a lot. Probably a lot of 80s pop music, sort of stuff that was sort of fairly uplifting and sort of kind of a bit more cheerful to listen to. So especially, I mean, if the weather's very bad, we've got a treadmill in our garage and rollers, like bike rollers that we train on, and that's really, really boring. So a bit of music helps that. If you're spending an hour and a half on rollers, you need something to help pass the time.
And what about nutrition? How good was your diet back then? And did you know enough back when you were competing? Because there's so much information out now, but there probably wasn't back in the late 80s, early 90s. Is there anything that you know now from nutrition that you might have wished you'd known then at all?
No, my nutrition was really good, because there's no point spending lots of time training if you're not thinking about what you eat and how much you sleep. So I'm really keen still, for the athletes that we work with, that that they get their nutrition from real food. So there's loads of products on the market now with protein and carb drinks and all these different bars and things. But actually, I think real food's quite good. So you have to be very organised in terms of how you plan your food and your nutrition. So we lived on a lot of chicken, steamed vegetables, and pastoral rice. But that's fine. For me, it was food. Getting the right food balance was massively important. So I guess, hydration is hugely important. Like we used to drink squash with salt in it, which is still one of the best things you can have to rehydrate after training. Not terribly pleasant, a bit of an acquired taste. So I think I'm glad I don't have to drink that anymore. No, I think we spent a lot of time learning about everything around the sport. It's not just about when you turn up on race day. It's everything that you could possibly do leading up to race day.
So your first Olympics was 1988 in Seoul, your first Paralympics, in fact. How was that experience for you?
It was amazing because the Games had been in Rome in 1960 after the Olympics, and then sort of in the intervening years they'd gone off to different countries or different cities within the host country. So Seoul was the first time that the two games came together. And no one really knew what to expect. But, the packed stadiums, loads of people were watching. And it was really fun, very different culture to be in, very different food, not being able to speak any other language. I was 19 when I went. So, it was a big change for me to go there. But I won a bronze medal. And, I think for me that made me realise that I really wanted to be an athlete. And if that's what I wanted to do, I had to kind of knuckle down. I learned a huge amount from the experience of Seoul, and that kind of set me up for the next 4-year cycle.
And 4 years later, Barcelona, you won 4 golds. How did it feel when you won that first gold?
Amazing. Just an incredible experience, and very exciting. And knowing that, I'd gone into 92 and broken world records in the 4 distances that I competed over. Knowing that I'd made that sort of jump was brilliant. My dad and my sister were there. My mum didn't like watching me compete, so she stayed at home. But it was brilliant to have my family there and get to share that kind of moment with them. So, and Barcelona was a great games. Just beautiful venues, lovely weather, and also one of the sponsors, charity called Once, which is a charity for blind people in Spain. They put a huge amount of money into the games, and they recognised how important it was for them to do a good game. So I think it really stepped up the level of Paralympic organisation at that point.
You finished those games with 4 golds. Was it then difficult to stay motivated when you achieved such great success?
No, the motivation wasn't hard at all, because once you've achieved, you just want to keep doing it. It's actually... I think it's more motivating. For me, it was, because I didn't want that to be the only games that I won a gold medal at. So, the next 4 years, back in training, again, was making big jumps and huge improvements. I got to Atlanta in 96 and I came away with a gold and 3 silvers. In 3 of my 4 events, there was someone quicker than me, and there's nothing that you can do about that. It wasn't necessarily great at the time because the team were expecting me to win 4 golds, and the medal table is based around gold medals. Silver and bronzes are sort of only count if you've tied another country on gold medals. So it's a pretty harsh world in sport. I think there are a lot of people around who thought I should retire. One of my team managers told me he thought I was done and I should stop. But for me, that wasn't an option. I knew that I wanted to keep going.
Yeah, were you disappointed, or did you look at it as, these are silver medals, these are something which so many people in the world would dream to be having, and it's not gold this time, but you can get gold again, because there's different feelings you see of the athletes in the Olympics now. Some are absolutely delighted with silver, and some are very disappointed.
I felt very ambivalent about my silver medals, to be honest. So, in Seoul, I won a bronze. In Atlanta, I lost 3 golds. So, the 200 meters, I broke the world record in the semi, but, couldn't replicate that in the final. So, it's nice to have them, but, and I'd rather 3 silvers to none. But that wasn't what I was going to do. I was going there to try and win 4 gold medals. So, I didn't quite achieve that. So, again, in a different way, I found that very motivating, because I wanted to come back and be number 1 in the world again.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Don't worry, we've got more from Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson in just a moment, but I just wanted to remind you that for you, the listeners of the Best in the World with Richard Parr podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. And in fact, if you've enjoyed this chat so far with Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, then maybe you'd like to listen to her audiobook. It is on Audible. It's called Aim High, and you get even more insight than we're giving you today for free on the Best in the World podcast, and you can download this for free with Audible. All you've got to do to download your free audiobook today, that's right now once you finish listening to this podcast, is go to audibletrial.com/best. One more time for you, it's audibletrial.com/best for your free audiobook. Aim High. That's Tanni Grey-Thompson's book, but you should be aiming high anyway because you listen to the best in the world. So let's get back to my conversation with Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
I've heard you say that you had 4 or 5 perfect races. Is there any one in particular you look back on the most fondly?
There was a 400-metre race in Switzerland in 2002. So it was the summer after I gave birth to my daughter. And I remember one of my team managers telling me that me becoming a mother would make me soft and I wouldn't be a very good athlete. So that was quite a short conversation I had with him. Yeah, it was a very short conversation. And I remember just I can almost even now remember every single push of that race to break the world record. My husband was there and he wasn't by the clock to see the time for the race. So I'd come off the track. I'd known how quick I was. And I was, very excited. And he looked at me and he just, some of the other teammates were around. And he looked at me and he said, your first 6 pushes weren't great. You need to nail that, in the next race. And I remember all the other guys on the team just looked at him and went, did you see the time? And he was like, yeah, whatever, but she needs to nail it. And then he turned around and he looked at the clock and he went, yeah, I'm still right. You still need to nail the first 6 pushes. So that was quite funny. It was definitely one of the best races of my life.
So after 96, you had 2 more Olympics. You ended up winning, I believe it was 4 golds then later in Sydney in 2000. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so did you feel that was a year of redemption after 96?
I think so because it felt great. It felt great to be on the podium 4 times, which is a nice place to be. And it felt that all the hard work that I'd put in was justified, really. And asking my family to put up with me competing for another 4 years is always difficult. So I did one more cycle after that as well, but it felt good because again, it's that difference between whether you think you've won or you've lost. Some of the gold medals I've won I wouldn't count in my top 10 races. Some of them are in my top 10 races, so sometimes you can win when you're not necessarily the best person on the day, but you have a bit of luck or you make the right decision. And sometimes, you can lose and you are the best, so winning and losing and the gold medal is this very complicated thing that goes on. So it felt amazing to be back winning and being number 1 again. So because actually for most of that cycle between Atlanta and Sydney, I was number 1 in the world.
And by 2007, you decided to retire from the sport. How difficult was that, and how difficult was it to adjust to a life without it?
It wasn't difficult to decide to stop, but emotionally and physically, I was done. Actually, I knew after Athens that I wasn't going to do another 4-year cycle, and I probably knew in 2005 that it was going to be some point that following year that I stopped. As I went through 2006, I was sick and I was getting some injuries, and I didn't have a great World Championships. I won a gold, silver, and bronze, but I wasn't competing at my best. So I made the decision then that I was going to retire early in 2007. I wanted it to be on home soil. I wanted my family around, which if I'd retired at an international race, that would have been hard to have them close by. I mean, very little thing. I wanted to have a dinner to say thank you to all the people who'd helped me in my sporting career. And again, if I'd been away, I couldn't have done that in the way that I wanted to do it. So I'd actually been planning my transition for quite a few years before that, because in sport, you never know when you're going to be done. You could get injured or your team manager drops you. So life outside, nothing is going to be the same as competing in front of 90,000 people, but I don't want it to be. But for me, I'm quite organised and I like planning things. I didn't want to get to the end and then think, what am I going to do? I wanted some of that set in place beforehand. And, we're lucky by that point, we'd won the right to host the Olympic and Paralympic Games. I had an opportunity to work with the organising committee. And then, it kind of went from there. So for me, that kind of planning that transition is incredibly important.
Well, in 2010, you went into the House of Lords. Was there any part of your daily routine or anything that you used as an athlete which was able to help you make that adjustment more easily than had you not been involved in sports?
I think what sport taught me is that, the rules are really important. So, it's important in athletics to know what you can and can't get disqualified for doing. And it's the same in politics. So there's a lot of rules about how we speak to each other in the chamber and how we interact with each other. About, there's all sorts of different ways of getting legislation through that you want to try and do. So for me, it was about learning the rules and enjoying the moment, which is really important to do, and working hard. These days, bizarrely, everything we do is time limited. So it's a bit like life in sports. So, you go into a debate, you have a maximum time that you can speak for. So it might be 3 minutes, it might be 6 minutes. And within that time allocation, you have to make an impact. So, I've spent 5 days writing a speech that could be no longer than 2 minutes. So a lot of the stuff from sport just transfers really well into life in politics.
And you said that you weren't definitely sure that you'd end up in a life in politics, and politics hasn't always been something that many young people are interested in. Do you think the Brexit debate has kind of helped change that? Like, for example, whenever I went on my Facebook page for the last 2 months, it was full of opinion and political opinion, which wasn't necessarily there before.
I hope sort of young people have realised the importance of voting. So, one of my grandparents, she was born in 1900. So my grandmother grew up without the right to vote. So it was incredibly important for her. So she used to talk about it all the time. When she got married, she actually had no choice. She had to give up work because, companies didn't employ married women. So, for me, that kind of right to vote was, and the importance of voting was always there, and having an opinion. And I think over time that's become less important as we move further away from the Second World War. That's become sort of less important. So I'm hugely disappointed by how little politics is taught in school. How difficult it can be for young people to register to vote. But I think Brexit has made people understand that they need to be more aware of what's going on in the world, and they need to be aware of how they vote, because it does have a big impact on everybody.
I noticed you're very involved in Twitter. I mentioned social media there. How much do you enjoy using social networks?
I love social networking. I think you've got to be careful. I've got opinions on everything, but not everything I think should be public. Sometimes you can get very interesting reactions from people. I do get trolled a bit, which is quite variable. So, I think you have to be a bit careful sometimes about not taking too much of it to heart, because people can be very aggressive if they have a different opinion. But for me, it's a great way of communicating with people. It's a great way of me learning what's going on in the world. So I'm a huge fan of it.
Does it need to be better policed when you say you're getting trolled? And is there a fine line between abuse and opinion?
I think there is a fine line between people thinking they have freedom of speech and being abusive. So there are some people who hide behind freedom of speech and hide behind anonymity on social media, which I don't. So if somebody has a very vague username, I'm far less likely to engage with them in any kind of political discussion. I'm happy to explain, I think I should, how I vote on things or why I vote. And, I kind of have to justify it to myself in a kind of moral sense. But I think people sometimes feel that in a way they wouldn't say things to your face. They feel that through social media that they can do that. So sometimes, I've had a couple of people recently who've come back the next day and apologised because it was a bit late at night, or they're tired, or they maybe had a glass of wine, and then realised some of the things they've said weren't terribly smart. So, I do try to be polite as possible on social media, because I think it's important that I kind of remain objective and, behave in a certain way.
Well, thank you so much for this interview, Baroness. Before we go, why don't you just tell our listeners how they can continue to follow your work and what you're up to on Twitter and social media and any other websites or any other forms of communication? That would be wonderful.
On Twitter, I'm Tanni_GT, and I've also got my own website, which is tanni.co.uk. So all the latest stuff I'm doing and the politics I'm involved in and the sport I'm involved in is all there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, thank you for being the best in the world.
Thank you.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Thanks again to Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson for being on this week's Best in the World with Richard Parr. Really appreciate her time in her very busy schedule working in the House of Lords. An incredible athletic resume and an inspiring story from her. But Tanni Grey-Thompson isn't the only Paralympian we've ever had on the Best in the World with Richard Parr. We've also had Alfonso Cunningham. He was on episode 3, and we've also had Amy Mullins. She was also on the podcast. 2 fantastic guests, Paralympians who are the best in the world, and they've been on the show. Go back and listen to those previous episodes. And if you've liked this show or any of our back catalogue, any of our previous episodes, what I'd love you to do is go on to iTunes and click subscribe, firstly, so you get all of the new latest podcasts, but also rate and review. It really helps me and our show. I would really appreciate it if you spend those 30 seconds doing that for me. Just want to remind you all the different ways you can get in touch with me. On Twitter, I'm at Richard_Parr. That's the same for Instagram if you want to see some pictures. You can follow the show on our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Best in the World with Richard Parr. Yeah, I know it's quite a long title, but it's the name of the show. That's kind of what we have to do. And also there's more on richardparr.net, including on the media page. I've got a video of my time with the powerlifters, which I was speaking about earlier in the show, with the powerlifters in Kazakhstan, the Iranian Siaman Rahman, and other great stars from the Paralympics. If you want to go back and see that, that's richardparr.net. There's also a contact page. If you have any suggestions about the show, what you like, what you don't like, or absolutely anything you want to tell me, perhaps there's a guest you'd like to hear on the show, and we can try and reach out and get them on the program, because we love learning about the best in the world. Thank you so much for listening to the show. We'll have another great guest next Wednesday. Goodbye for now.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.